Just last November, I stood on the mountaintop at Shiloh, or as we Americans call it, Shiloh, a place where the tabernacle of God stood for 369 years. The tabernacle would be the place where the Ark of the Covenant was, and God's throne was there, and God spoke from there, and the cloud of glory was there. It's the place Joshua would have been when he first set up the nation of Israel. It's the place that Samuel would have been when Hannah wasn't even pregnant yet and came, and she prayed at that spot that she would have a child. The child would become Samuel. It's the place that so many things happen in Bible history, and I thought, man, when I get there, I was wondering, like, if God's very throne sat on this specific hilltop for 369 years in human history, I wonder if there's any residue of his presence, right? I'm going to spend a little time praying to God. Like, I'm going to seek God at the mountaintop at Shiloh. And the guide wouldn't shut up the whole time. And next thing you know, we're back on the bus. I'm going to take a group in May, and I'll tell you one thing. We are going to pray at Shiloh. Like, find your space. God's got to tell you something. When we read the Old Testament, there are these tremendous stories of these saints who have gone before. Some I just mentioned from Joshua and Samuel and King David and, Isaac and Abraham. And you read these stories, and the goal behind the stories is these were the ways that God was moving in history. And he was teaching all of humanity something through select individuals. And then over time, their stories would be written down, and the Holy Spirit of God himself would speak to the writers and say, this is the story I want recorded. This is the one that's meaningful, and I want this recorded with these words this way. So the Bible is actually written by the Holy Spirit through people, and is telling often the stories of what happened in history so that everybody in modern era can go back and learn not only what happened to human beings there, but what was God doing in that moment. And what is God saying to us about these stories? And so when you travel the Holy Land or you're in those spots, you realize this is powerfully profound, this space where God spoke and is still speaking today through his word. And I love reading these stories. And every now and then, I will admit, I run across one story or two stories in the Bible that I have to say are absolutely crazy. They make no sense to me. I read the story and I'm like, how did that one make it in the Bible? And what am I supposed to learn from that crazy story that makes no sense to me and seems absolutely absurd? Am I the only one? No. You guys all have this. You've been in a little Bible reading. You've done a little Bible reading. You're all like, I will occasionally run across the story that I think is absolutely insane, and I don't think it belongs in the Bible. And yet it's there. And God is speaking through it. So today, I've been doing this little series of, hunting and pecking through the Old Testament, different Bible stories. Today, I thought, let's unpack the craziest, wildest, most insane Bible story of them all. Are you in? You ready for this? Okay. It's found at the tail end of the book of Judges. And if you're going to use one of these Bibles that we provide, the book of Judges, we're going to look at 19, 20, and 21, and page 262 in the Bible that we provide for you. And it'll be what happened in this period of time where the nation had come and had formed, and it was all together, but it was in 12 tribes without a centralized government. In fact, the very first phrase of chapter 18 is, there was no king in Israel in those days. And the very first sentence of chapter 19 is, there was no king in Israel in those days. So the writer who's writing, clearly when he says that, he's writing some years later when there is a king in Israel. And he's writing back looking at the time when there was not. And what does he mean by there's no king in Israel? Well, in their system of government, there means there was no central authority. There was no constitution. There was no Congress. There were no laws that were nationwide laws for them. They were just, everybody was kind of doing his own thing. In fact, the reoccurring phrase in the book of Judges is, every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Meaning that they weren't coming up with a kind of a universal plan of values, ethics, morals, and governments, but everybody kind of said, well, I'm going to do it this way, I'm going to do it that way. Now, God had spoken. God had laid down a law. God had laid down a place where that law was going to be celebrated and disseminated, where his ark was, where the tabernacle was, but people ignored that and did their own thing. The very tail end of the book of Judges, the story picks up with these people doing their own thing. Now, in chapter 19, I'm just going to summarize it for you, and we're just going to spend most of our time in chapter 21. So chapter 19, I think I got a map of what the nation would have looked like in their time. So there's these 12 tribes. There's one tribe called Levi. The tribe of Levites didn't get land. They were actually the priesthood people. They were supposed to be the ones who taught everybody about God and the laws of God, and they were supposed to be the ones who were the most known about Torah. And their goal was they were spread out inside all of the other tribes, and they were the teachers of the law of God. That was their role. When they reached 30, they could be a priest, and then they could earn their way up to the priesthood, and the priesthood was serving at Shiloh in this period of time. That's where the priesthood headquarters would be. But you see, there's these tribes that are all gathered rounded about. And the story begins in chapter 19, where a Levite who's from the tribe of Ephraim, which you can see is about dead center in the middle there, right above and just to the left of the Dead Sea. He's from the tribe of Ephraim. And it tells us in chapter 19 that he has gone down to Bethlehem. And let's pop up, I think the next map might have my cities on it. Yeah, he goes down. He's from Ephraim, that tribe. He crosses through the tribe of Benjamin's territory, goes down into the Judah territory, and he picks up a girl in Bethlehem. And she is his concubine. And a concubine means a woman you live with that you're not married to, but you treat her as if she's a wife. It's a fine English word. We don't like using it anymore. You never go to a party and say, "Hi, I'm Mike. This is my concubine, Debbie. Nice to meet you." You never hear that anymore, do you? Right? I think somebody would get slapped or punched if they said, "This is my concubine, Debbie. I'd like you to meet her." No, we don't use that, but that's what the word is. That's actually the English word, right? So he goes down and he gets this girl from Bethlehem. He takes her back up to Ephraim, and the way the phrase is in the New Old Testament is, and she played the harlot. What does that mean? Well, she stepped out on him and played around, right? And so there's a big confrontation. She flees back to Bethlehem, hangs out with her dad, and he decides he's going to go get her. So he goes down to Bethlehem, and he picks up this concubine. And for a few days, the dad kind of wines and dines him, and I'm sure dad's trying to calm things down. I don't know if he's a good guy or a bad guy. I don't know if she's a good girl, or I think on the side she's been a bad girl. And he wines and dines him for a few days. And finally, on the last day, the Levite's like, "Hey, listen, I got to get back to Ephraim. We're heading out." He's like, "Oh, no, it's late in the day. Stay." And he goes, "You've already pulled that trick 2 days. We're out of here." So he and his servant and the concubine pack up, and they start heading north back to Ephraim. And on his way, he passes the city of Jebus. And it's evening starting to fall. And it's like, well, you better get into a town and get settled. And Jebus, at this time, is controlled by the Jebusites. That's why it's called Jebus. Later on in history, King David will conquer that city and rename it Jerusalem. Right? And that's what it's going to be. But at this time in history, it's like, that's where the dirty Jebusites live. I'm not going there. I can't trust them. They're not our kind of people. And so he says, no, we're going to pass by Jebus, and we'll move on, and we will settle with fellow Jewish people, fellow Hebrews, in the town of Gibeah. The next, it's about 3 miles up the road. So they head up to Gibeah, and they get into Gibeah, and I believe I have some pictures of what Gibeah looks like in the modern times. I think I got a couple of shots of that. Yeah, this is Gibeah in modern times. It's actually a hilltop, and it's Tel El Ful is the way it's used in Arabic. In Arabic, it's the new name. It means Hill of Beans. Hill of Beans, right? And there it is, and it's on the northern suburbs of modern Jerusalem. So modern Jerusalem is now spread further enough away that actually the ancient site of Gibeah is in the boundaries of the city of Jerusalem. And you see that big building that was built on the top of the mountain there. The first king of Jordan, not the current one, but his dad, decided he was going to build a palace there. And so he started construction on a palace, and in 1967, his country and Lebanon and Iraq and Egypt all decided, hey, let's just attack Israel and get rid of it, and then we can have all the land. And so they got ready for the attack, and then as they were getting their armies and their tanks and everything on the borders, getting ready to devour and conquer and destroy Israel, Israel attacked first, and they all lost the land, and he lost this land. And now it's part of what we would call the West Bank, the Israeli people call Samaria. It's part of the ancient Samaria. And so the shell of the palace sits empty on the hilltop of Gibeah, which I think is an interesting sign as we unpack this story. Okay, so he's in the town of Gibeah. This guy settles into the town of Gibeah, this Levite and his concubine. We never even know his name, and we certainly never know her name. So he's from Ephraim, he goes into the center of the town, and he's supposed to, well, the hospitality of the day is, if a visitor was in your town, you took them in. Now, we're Americans, so we think individually. So we always think, not my people, not my problem, not my family, not my responsibility. We think totally individually as Americans. That's how we've been taught to think. Many cultures don't think that way. They think collectively. So when a fellow person of your nationality comes into town, you are duty bound with the rights and the rules of hospitality to bring them into your home and house them for a night. Most Mideastern cultures have a whole different view of hospitality. It would be a horrific faux pas to allow someone to sleep in the middle of your town and not invite them into your house and take care of them for the night. That would be a major mistake to be made socially, morally, ethically. No one would ever do that. And he's sitting in the square, and nobody's going to invite him into their town in Gibeah. And he's rich enough that he has all of his supplies. He doesn't need you to supply a meal for him. He's got all the food necessary, but he's in the middle of the town, and nobody invites him in, because the townspeople know something he doesn't know. Late at night, a fellow Ephraimite who lives in the vicinity is coming home from his fields, an old man who's down in the tribe of Benjamin, coming home to Gibeah, and he sees him sitting there. He's like, "What are you doing in the square?" He goes, "Well, nobody invited me." And he goes, "Oh, this will never do. Come into my house." And the guy says, "I have everything I need. I got all the food for my animals and my concubine and my servant, and I have got everything I need." He goes, No, I will supply you. So he brings him into his home, which was the official rights of hospitality you were duty-bound to do. There were no such things as hotels in any of these societies because at this time in history, because that is not what was done. It was never needed. So this old man brings him into his house. And the dead of night, the Gibeonite men come to the door, banging on the door, and they want the main Ephraimite guy there, "Throw this new guy out. We intend to sexually molest him, abuse him, and kill him tonight." Oh, that's what the citizens of Gibeah knew about their own town. They're like, "Why is nobody taking him in?" Because we know what's going to happen tonight. We know the men of this town. We know the ethics and the morals of this place. We are not bringing this guy into my home. We'll let someone else take on the trouble. And so the guy who's the host, the other part rule of hospitality is once you brought someone into your home, you were duty bound to actually defend them with your life. If someone was a guest in your home, the moral codes and ethics of the day is you defend them with your life if they are a guest in your home, especially once they've eaten with you. If you've eaten with them, you are duty bound for that. And so the old man is like fighting. These guys in the town want to kill this dude. They don't know what to do. They're bring him out. We're going to rape him. We're going to destroy him. We're going to kill him. This is what's going on. And the old man doesn't know what to do, and he's kind of scrambling. And finally, in order to save their lives, they throw the concubine out the door, like you do, right? And she gets, I always think it's interesting if you actually read a lot of history, being that was my undergrad. And women in history, I don't know if you guys appreciate how well you are to live in the modern times. Throughout most of human history, women were commodities and products you traded for. Sorry to say that, but it's true. You were commodities and products that were traded, and you were thought, well, if we lose a woman, we can always get another one, right? And you know when women actually started to become honored in a society and a culture, particularly in Western culture? It was under the age of chivalry in the Middle Ages. Right? That's like, even now we would say, well, that's not chivalrous. This guy should have protected his concubine with his life. He shouldn't have thrown her out the door. Well, that's because we all inherited the concept of the virtues of chivalry. That's still in our society. We would never think that the man should throw the girl out the door and let her get abused so he could save his own life. But that is because in the age of chivalry, the Virgin Mary became super important. And because the Virgin Mary became super important, the knights, the men of renown, the powerful guys, the warriors started to say, you know, if she's the mother of Jesus and she's honored like this, maybe we should start protecting women in general. The age of chivalry was birthed out of the fact that the knights of old respected the Virgin Mary. And you guys have the Catholics now to thank for that. Give them a little thank you. Right? So he's like, whoop, whoop, right? And so you got this, that's where it's born. But mostly what this guy does is not considered shocking. Well, they violate this woman all night long. In the morning, he comes on the doorstep. She has crawled her way back to the doorstep, and she is dropped dead. He loads her up on his donkey. He takes her home to Ephraim, and he cuts her up into 12 pieces and sends the 12 pieces to the rest of the tribes. That's true love. I'm like, he does what? Look, none of you guys are even shocked. You're like, yeah, like you do. I'm like, what? I mean, think about that. You take this woman you were living with as if she was your wife. you get her home, and you don't give her a proper burial. You cut her up into 12 pieces, and then you send the pieces throughout the tribes of Israel. It was meant to be shocking. It was meant to horrify people. And what he's trying to do is say, look what happened to me and my concubine in Gibeah. And everybody who sees these body parts, I can't imagine, like some guy got an arm and he travels up to Naphtali and he's showing her arm in Naphtali, and like, what is this cut off arm going on? There was a horrible violation down in Gibeah. Rally the troops, right? And that's what happens to all 12 of the tribes. And so they all gather. And in chapter 19, verse 30, it says, all who saw it said, no such deed has been done or seen from the day that the children of Israel came up from the land of Egypt till this day. Consider it, confer, speak up. So everyone throughout the 12 tribes is so shocked that they come and they gather at the site of Mizpah, just a little bit north of Gibeah. And in chapter 20, we see them coming. And the phrase will be from Dan to Beersheba they gathered. Dan was the northernmost town, Beersheba the southernmost. It's the same way we would say from New York to L.A., right? That means what? The entire United States. Everybody from New York to L.A. Nobody ever says Seattle to Miami. I don't know why. You can leave Seattle behind, I guess, evidently. They don't want to say Seattle. They always say New York to L.A., and that means the entire United States, right? That's what it means. That's the slang term for it. Well, the Israelites would say from Dan to Beersheba. Everybody showed up, and they showed up at the little town of Mizpah, which is known as Watchtower. I think I've got pictures there. Now, we're not sure archaeologically where this town exactly is, and there's 2, possibly 3 sites. One of them is where the tomb of Samuel is, Samuel the prophet. It's in modern-day Nabi Samuel. It's one of the 3 possible. The other is down in the Tel and Nazba. That's a second possible location. So this could be it, but they know there's a town of Mizpah. They know it's a little bit north of the current modern Gibeah, but they don't know exactly where. So I don't know if I have it next, but maybe pop me back to that map, Denise, the map. Go backwards. Yeah. So you can see Bethlehem, Jabez, Gibeah, Ramah, and then Mizpah is going to be kind of in between Bethel and Ramah there on the map. I didn't have room to put it in, so I didn't put it there. But that's where they're gathered, Ramah and near Bethel. In Mizpah they gather. And it tells us in chapter 20 that 400,000 warriors show up to deal with this horrific crime that has been committed by the men of Gibeah. And they gather and they send word over to the tribe of Benjamin. And they say to the tribe of Benjamin, hand over these culprits, these horrific, violent abusers who've committed this atrocious act and done violent murder to this young woman. Bring those culprits to us so that we can execute them. And the men of Benjamin say, no, we don't think so. Come get them if you think you're tough enough. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine any kind of society where the powers that be are protecting these violent criminals from justice? Never heard of such a thing. Anyway, so the tribe of Benjamin says, no, we're not going to give up our fellow brethren to you guys. Forget about it. Now, way back in the day when great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa Jacob was blessing his 12 sons, and the sons are all named. They would be the progenitors of these tribes. And at the end of his life, he lays hands on all their heads and he blesses them. And his blessing is actually a prophecy. Benjamin is actually the youngest of all the 12 sons. And he puts his hands on little Benjamin's head. At this time, Benjamin's a grown man, but he's the youngest brother of 12. And the prophecy in Genesis 49:27 that Jacob gives to Benjamin on his head is, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey. At night he shall divide the spoil. There's your blessing. Go away. What does that mean? It means that the Benjamites, although they were the smallest and youngest and least tribe, they were a pack of fighters. They somehow, little Benjamin, produced a whole line of people that were fighters. And they were the best fighters Israel had. And so they say, no, we're not going to give these men up. Come and get them, right? Now, Benjamin's got 26,000 men. The town of Gibeah has 700 men. And in addition, they have specially trained 700 guys who could sling with a sling, and they were slingers left-handed. Like, I don't understand. Well, first off, you know the sling, it's a leather thong with a little pouch in the bottom, and you twirl it like this, and you throw about a baseball-sized rock. And they could throw those rocks 140 miles an hour with a sling. Very deadly, very accurate. They could throw without missing, and they could kill people with that. And these guys were left-handed slingers. Well, why is that important? All right, pretend you're all got your right-handed shield up. Hold your right-handed shield up on your arm. If I'm slinging right-handed, my shot's going to go like that, right? My shot's going like that. My shot's going like that. Hey, no sweat. I got my shield up. If you're left-handed, if it's coming from a left-handed guy, the shot's coming the opposite way and hitting you in spite of the fact that you have your shield up. So they had specially trained these guys to be slingers. And do you know that left-handed athletes actually are statistically way more accurate? Why do you think finding left-handed baseball pitchers is the big deal? Because they actually have more left-handed boxers. Because everybody's trained to fight a right-handed opponent because that's the dominant hand. So when you find a left-handed guy, nobody knows what to do with him. They aren't trained, they aren't experienced, they aren't practiced in this. So they've got left-handed slingers who are deadly accurate and can hit people even if their shields are up. And so they sit down and they decide that they're going to decide, okay, we're going to go to war. This has gone from turn these guys over to now we got to go to war. And they decide that they would figure out what? Now, if you've got your Bible open, looking at chapter 20, and look at verse 9 really quick. It's on page 263. It says, but now this is the thing which we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot. By lot. Well, what does that mean? It means that when they wanted to know what God's opinion was, they threw dice. They drew straws. They flipped a coin. And they believed God would speak through whatever the outcome was. Now, there are times in history when that's true. But if you look at those times in history when that happened, people went before God, they worshiped Him, they prayed, they sought His guidance, and at the end, they flipped the coin, rolled the dice, drew the straws to get God's answer after they had worshiped and prayed and sought God. And God did speak that way several times in the Old Testament. This time, though, they're just doing it by, they got a 12-sided die, like they're Dungeons and Dragons players. They roll it on the ground, and it comes up, number 4, Judah, you go first. So up they go, attacking the 400,000 guys behind them, and they lose the battle. The Benjamites and their left-handed slingers kill 22,000 of their men. They go back the next day, and they're very upset. And in their very upset, they start to talk with each other. They'll make some vows we'll learn about later. And then they ask God, should we go up again? And they, roll the dice. Oh, yeah, let's do it. We'll do it again. They go up the next day, and they lose 18,000 men. That's how tough Benjamin was. And so you realize now they've lost, They've lost 40,000 people. They've lost 1 in every 10 guy who showed up. 1 in every 10 guy who had shown up is now dead. Imagine how many are wounded, and how many are maimed, and how many are harmed, how many total casualties they have. 1 in every 10 is dead. And now it says in Judges 20, verses 26 through 27, it says, then all the children of Israel, that is the people, went up and came to the house of God and wept. They sat there before the Lord and fasted that day until evening. And they offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. So the children of Israel inquired of the Lord. The ark of the covenant of God was there in those days, and Phinehas, as the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, stood before it in those days, saying, shall I yet again go out to battle against the children of my brother Benjamin, or shall I cease? And the Lord said, go up, for tomorrow I will deliver them into your hands. It's a little weird passage. So look, you see the town of Bethel on the map, town of Bethel there. Bethel actually means house of God. Beth is the Hebrew word for house. El is the abbreviation for God. So Beth El means house of God. So they're in Mizpah, Bethel, hanging out in these regions, flipping the coin, rolling the dice, asking God's opinion. After 2 lost battles, they go to the actual house of God, which is where the tabernacle is. It's where the throne of God is. The Ark of the Covenant is there. The menorah is there burning. The table of showbread, the incense, the priests are there. Now they go, let's go up the road to Shiloh, to the actual house of God. Let's leave house of God, the town, and go to the house of God, which is in Shiloh. And there before God in Shiloh, finally they fast, they pray, they spend their time worshiping. They offer burnt offerings, which is a sin sacrifice. They're offering peace offerings to the Lord, like let's clean and purge the sin out of our own midst. And then there they finally go before the Ark of the Covenant. And it says that actually it was Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, who was the priest at that time, which would have meant this story actually isn't taking place at the end of Judges. This story is taking place somewhere near the beginning. It's recorded at the end of the book of Judges, but chronologically this takes place earlier on because Phinehas knew Moses. And so this is kind of fairly early in the history after they've settled the land and gone their own ways. It's about the grandchildren age of those who've come into the promised land. It's now the grandchildren who are the ones doing it. It's not the great-great-great-grandchildren. And so they go before him at Shiloh, and finally they ask God, shall we do this? Now that they've really gone before God, repented, prayed, done their due diligence with God in worship and in cleansing their own sin, God says, yes, go up. For tomorrow I will deliver them into your hand. And so the third day, they go out, this time with a battle plan. Now, when there was 400,000 against 26,700, they thought, we don't need no battle plan. Look how big we are. Look how many guys we got. We'll just go take it, no problem, right? So now they've realized, maybe even though we outnumber them like 5-1, 10-1, maybe we should have a battle plan. And so they decide this time, we're going to go up there with a slightly smaller force. We'll go to the gates of Gibeah, and we'll fake like they're winning, and we will start to run away, and they will chase us. And as we run away and chase us, we'll keep thousands more guys behind, hidden in the hills. And when the soldiers and the warriors of Benjamin come out of Gibeah, roll down the hillside and chase us down the valley, these guys in hiding will go take the city, and other guys in hiding will come out, and they will destroy them from the left and the right sides. They have a battle plan. So that's what they do on the third day. And they win dramatically. Because exactly what they think is going to happen happens. The Benjamites, in their excitement to win a third day of battle, chase them down the valley. And then the next thing you know, a bunch of guys in hiding go into the city of Gibeah. And they burn it. They destroy it. And the smoke of the city's rising up. The Benjamites turn to look and they go, oh my gosh, our city's on fire. Something's gone wrong. They turn around to run back to their city. Guys come out of the woodwork and they slay the Benjamites. Utterly obliterate them. 18,000 men are cut down, fleeing the city and running away. Another 5,000 on the highway head towards the Rock of Ramon, a place further north and to the east. Another 2,000 in a town called Gidom are killed. Actually, by the time it's said and done, 25,000 soldiers of the Benjamite, more than 25,000, will be utterly destroyed and killed that day. Only 600 Benjamites will survive. And they make it to this place called the Rock of Ramon, and they're like inside, they're on this high fortress-like rock, and they hold out there, and they can't be captured there. They're the only ones left alive. And it says in verse 48, the final verses of chapter 20, and the men of Israel turned back against the children of Benjamin and struck them down with the edge of the sword from every city, men and beasts, all who were found. They also set fire to all the cities they came to. So not only did they kill the Benjamite army, they went spread out through that whole territory of Benjamin you see on the map, and they destroyed all of the cities inside Benjamin. So they were left with no cities, and the only thing Benjamin had left was 600 powerful warriors sitting on the Rock of Ramon who they couldn't take. Everybody else was wiped out. All right, chapter 21. And like where this begins, and this is where I start to go, what? I mean, there hasn't been enough what already. It says, now the men of Israel had sworn an oath at Mizpah. So when they were at Mizpah, probably the second day of the battle, I'm guessing, they had sworn an oath. They had taken a vow. And it says, none of us shall give his daughter to Benjamin as a wife. And then the people came to the house of God and remained there before God till evening. Now, I don't know if this time if they're in Bethel or Shiloh. I'm not sure. In one of those two places. And the battle is done. The day is over. They've wiped Benjamin out, left only 600 guys remaining. And they had taken an oath a couple days earlier. Hey, we're so mad about the number of people we've lost. Let's take a vow. Nobody's ever going to give one of their daughters to the Benjamites to marry. Does that sound good? Yeah, that's a great idea. Let's take the vow. Now, once you've taken the vow, it would produce a curse on your life if you broke it. And a vow meant to the death. And so they took this vow, and then they waged the battle, and now they've won the battle, and now they're kind of going, hey, this might be a problem because Benjamin's going to be wiped out. And it says in verse, it says, then the people came to the house of God and remained there before God till evening, and they lifted up their voices and wept bitterly and said, O Lord God of Israel, Why has this thing come to pass in Israel that today there should be one tribe missing in Israel? What? Why? 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 Because you guys killed them all. What are you going to asking God, why did this happen? Because you killed them all. It's your fault. Why are you blaming God, right? I think that's crazy. It says, so it was on the next morning that the people rose early and built an altar there and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. That's why I don't think this part of the story is taking place in Shiloh. It must be taking place in either Mizpah or Bethel, because they're building a secondary altar. Not the main altar they should be going to. They're building their own altar in the wrong town, in the wrong place, to ask God's favor. I was reading through commentaries on this, and they said, regarding this kind of warfare, it says, so victors in war, intent on total destruction of the enemy, learn soon after victory that the enemy must be quickly helped to his feet, or he will constitute an insupportable drain on the conqueror's economy and morale. The whole cycle must, from the perspective of God, seem a pathetic and almost insane display. We wipe them out, and now that they're completely wiped out, we got to help them, because we can't have this territory of Benjamin be abandoned. I mean, who knows the kind of people who will move in there and what will happen. We need them to build their economy back up and get back on their feet as a regular tribe with the rest of us. But how do we get them back up? Because we've actually eliminated their ability to marry and have children and replenish the tribe. Because they had taken this oath that nobody's going to give a man of Benjamin one of their daughters. And they can't intermarry with the pagan nations. That was against the laws of God. They could only marry other Hebrews. What are they going to do? Right now they're thinking about it. And it says, as it goes on, there was a second oath that they took at Mizpah. Verse 5, the children of Israel said, who is there among all the tribes of Israel who did not come up with assembly to the Lord? For they had made a great oath concerning anyone who had not come up to the Lord at Mizpah, saying, he shall surely be put to death. And the children of Israel grieved over Benjamin their brother and said, one tribe is cut off from Israel today. What shall we do for wives for those who remain, seeing we have sworn by the Lord that we will not give them our daughters as wives? And they said, what one is there from the tribes of Israel who did not come up to Mizpah to the Lord? And in fact, no one had come up from the camp of Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. For when the people were counted, indeed, not one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was there. So they had taken one vow, we won't give them our wives or our daughters to marry, but now we have to replenish this tribe. This will be bad for us if we don't. Our nation will fall apart, it'll be split in two. We certainly can't have the territory in the middle of the 12 tribes be taken over by Moabites or Ammonites or Jebusites, for crying out loud. That'd be horrible. What are we going to do to replenish them? And they sit around and they go, well, we took a second vow, saying anyone who didn't show up for the battle, that town should be put to death. Is there anybody who didn't show up? And they do an inventory, who's from what town where, and they realize nobody is here representing the town of Jabesh Gilead, way the heck north over in West Manasseh. And they said nobody showed up from Jabesh Gilead, so here's what they do. Verse 10. So the congregation sent out their 12,000 of their most valiant men and commanded them, saying, go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, including the women and children. And this is the thing that you shall do. You shall utterly destroy every male and every woman who has known a man intimately. So they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known a man intimately, and they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. And then the whole congregation sent word to the children of Benjamin, who were at the rock of Rimmon, and announced peace to them. So Benjamin came back at that time, and they gave them the women whom they had saved alive of the women of Jabesh Gilead. And yet they had not found enough for them. And the people grieved for Benjamin, because the Lord had made a void in the tribes of Israel. Now, if you aren't going, what? At this point, you're like, are you paying attention? So we go to war because a young woman was brutally abused and murdered by this group of guys in Gibeah. And that seems so unjust. Let's go to war to catch the culprits. And instead of handing over the culprits, it turned into a civil war, and the civil wars left many people dead. And now to solve the problem, let's go to Jabesh Gilead and kill every man, woman, child, and beast in the town and burn it to the ground and save the teenage girls. And bring them back and hand them over to the guys who are hiding out in the rock who fought against us. That's a marvelous idea. Are you not going, what? At this point in the equation, it's like, you went to war because of the violation of this girl, and now you're willing to go to a town and slaughter their moms and their dads, and their aunts, their uncles, their cousins, their little brothers, and just so that you can abduct them, bring them back, and line them up before these 600 guys and say, well, we brought you wives, pick one. Right? Pick one, we got them for you. And there's only 400, so they're 200 short. They're now 200 short. Now, I'm reading this story, when I first read these stories, I'm like, this is in the Bible, right? What in the world? So now they're 200 short, and now they got to figure out what to do because, well, that was the only town who didn't show, and we got all the teenage girls out of that town who had never been married, never known a man, and now what are we going to do? And so they come up with this other idea, starting in verse 16. Then the elders of the congregation said, what shall we do for wives for those who remain? The other 200 guys. Since the women of Benjamin have been destroyed. That's an interesting phrase to me right there. It's like, wait, you went into the tribe of Benjamin and you killed all the women? You slaughtered all the women? They hadn't put up a fight. They weren't guilty of this crime. They weren't the ones warring against you. You slaughtered all the women and children of Benjamin just to get revenge on the warriors who were so good that they could drive you out for the first 2 days of battle. You had this fearful, passionate, angry rage that you slaughtered all the women of Benjamin. Why were you at war again? Oh yeah, because a woman had been abused and violated and murdered. So what's your answer? Let's go murder all of their women. It's like, does this sound like something is wacky wrong here? Right? And it says, and they said, there must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, that a tribe may not be destroyed from Israel. However, we cannot give them wives from our daughters, for the children of Israel have sworn an oath, saying, cursed be the one who gives a wife to Benjamin. And then they said, well, in fact, there is a yearly feast of the Lord in Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east side of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem and south of Lebnoah. Therefore, they instructed the children of Benjamin, saying, go lie in wait in the vineyards and watch. And just when the daughters of Shiloh come out to perform their dances, then come out from the vineyards, and every man can catch a wife for himself from the daughters of Shiloh, and then go to the land of Benjamin. What? Yes, you are free to go abduct the women who are going to the festival to worship God. And if you can catch one, you can have her. And then it goes on. Right, it goes on, it says, where was it? Oh, verse 23. Then it shall be, when their fathers or their brothers come to us to complain, that we will say to them, be kind to them for our sakes, because we did not take a wife for any of them in the war. For it is not as though you have given the women to them at this time, making yourselves guilty of your oath. And the children of Benjamin did so. They took enough wives for their number from those who danced, whom they caught. Then they went and returned to their inheritance, and they rebuilt the cities and dwelt in them. So the children of Israel departed from there at that time, and every man to his tribe and family. They went out from there, and every man to his inheritance. So like, what's the answer? It's like, well, these last 200 guys can go to Shiloh when the festival happens, and the people come from usually everywhere to worship God in the right festivals, probably Passover, Feast of Tabernacles, or Booths, what we would call it, Pentecost, or 2 or 3 feasts that happen in the year, 3 feasts a year where people would come and they would worship at Shiloh. And so they told these last guys of Benjamin, if you can catch a girl who's dancing in worship, celebrating God, Yahweh, and you can get her back to your home, you can keep her. And when the fathers come and they say, hey, whoa, marriage is supposed to have a dowry exchange. There's supposed to be agreements. We need to know what kind of guy he is. We need to kind of figure this marriage thing out. It's a negotiated deal. And he's mad because his daughter just got captured and taken away and nothing got exchanged at all. And they don't even know who he is. And now he comes up saying, we need revenge. We can say, hey, you didn't give her in marriage, so technically you didn't violate your oath, so we're all good, right? And they said, that's going to be the deal. And they all went home happily ever after. There's a phrase, when I went to a Presbyterian church, there was this phrase, they would always read a scripture, and the person who read it would say, hear the word of the Lord, or this is the word of the Lord. And the congregation would always say, praise be to God. So you'd have someone say, right, and they abducted the women. Thus be the word of the Lord. Praise be to God. What? Right? Like, what? And don't you sit there and read this story and you're like, what in the world? Of all the stories that happen in history with godly, saintly people enduring and showing God who he was and what it's like to worship in his favor on him, what is this story doing in the Bible? Is it not the craziest story in the entire Bible? It is to me. Nothing compares. Well, there's one that's close, but this is by far, this is the craziest story in the Bible. And I never understood the whole thing. And I just I'm sitting in this what in the world? I will know. Now the book of Judges ends. The next book is the book of Ruth, and it's a story of something that happened in the period of the Judges. And then the next story, the next book begins, it's 1 Samuel. And Samuel is the prophet who will introduce a king to the nation of Israel. And their very first king will be a guy named Saul, and he is who the people want because he's big and tall and strong and handsome, and they think he'll make a mighty king for them. And guess what town Saul is from? Gibeah. He's from the town of Gibeah. He is a long inheritor of one of the girls who got abducted. Might have been his great-great-grandma. Or one of the women who was taken from Jabesh Gilead may have been his great-grandma. And so Saul will be their king, and he will be a wicked king, and he will actually set up the first capital of the nation of Israel in Gibeah. Not a great place. So that's how it begins. So I'm sitting there, and for years, I read this story, and I'm just like, what? 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 Right? For years, I read this story. And I would go to seminary and go to take a class and try to hear, tell me what this is about. Cricket. It's almost like everybody's like, we don't know. We don't know what that one is, right? One time I'm in San Francisco, and I'm working down there in East San Francisco Bay, and there was a Biblical Archaeology Review conference. And I read a lot of Biblical Archaeology Review, and I was like, hey, that's over in a hotel in San Francisco. That's only 40 minutes away. So I paid my dues, and I went to this conference. And at the conference was this woman professor. I think she was an Old Testament professor from Princeton. And she was doing the book of Judges. I'm like, let's go hear what she has to say, right? And I'm not a Baptist. I can learn from a woman because I'm not a Baptist. So I go and I sit in this class, and she starts teaching this story. And she gets near the end, and she says something really fascinating. She says, in verse 19 of chapter 20, she says, they say there's a feast of the Lord in Shiloh. And then she says, look how she has to describe, or look how the writer has to describe where Shiloh is. In verse 19, it's north of Bethel, on the east of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, but south of Lebnoah. And she said, the tabernacle, the ark of the covenant of God, the throne of God himself, the high priesthood, the high festivals that occurred annually, which required every Jew to come to 3 times a year. By the time the writer of the book of Judges gets to the end of writing this book, nobody knows where Shiloh is anymore. They have forgotten the worship of God. They have forgotten the laws of God. They've forgotten to listen to the voice of God. They have stopped realizing God was their king, and they were to obey him. And when it came to where God's throne was, they didn't even remember where anymore. And it has to be described. And then she said the last line in the book was, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Meaning, when you no longer have the laws of God, which create your virtues and your ethics and your morals, it gives you the compass to tell you whether you're in the right direction on right or wrong and truth and error. When you've thrown that out, There is no longer any direction for anyone. And you know what is the guiding power and principle of your ethics then? Your feelings. And your feelings become whatever you think is right. Whatever's right in my own eyes. And if you have a different view in your eyes, that's okay for you. That's your truth. And I have my truth, and you have your truth. And we all these truths. And whose truth prevails in society? The person whose feelings are the strongest. Even if they violate the laws and the morals and the values and the ethics of God Almighty. But they had stopped worshiping God. They'd given up on God. It has to be described where God's throne even is, because nobody remembers Shiloh anymore. God hadn't left. The tabernacle hadn't left. The throne hadn't left. The Ark of the Covenant where God sat hadn't left. The call to come and return to the worship festivals, the idea that God would continue to bless them if they worshiped Him and curse them if they didn't, that hadn't changed. But no one worshiped God anymore. They built altars in other places instead, took their counsel from one another, and then she said this. At the end of the story, they are sanctioning things and agreeing with things that would have been so abhorrent at the beginning of the story, they would have gone to war over it. They go from hating something that is so evil to endorsing the very thing they hated. Because all they had left to guide their moral compass was their feelings. Like, dang, that's why you teach at Princeton. Holy smokes. A society without God makes things up as they go along, and guaranteed in the pattern of history, they get it wrong. They always get it wrong. Because it is in the heart of man to rebel against God. Our sin nature turns us away from God. And if left to our own devices, we will drift further and further and further from the laws of God and end up endorsing things that we would once have hated when we were under God's laws. Wow. And now I know. Why is this story in the Bible? Because God was saying that happened 3,000 years ago. But the truth of it is still relevant today. The truth of it's still relevant. I was watching a TV show with a newscaster the other day, and she made this reference about our rights coming from government. Why are you laughing? Our rights don't come from government. You know what our Declaration of Independence says as it begins? This is why we felt that the United States of America could rebel against the King of England, throw off the yoke of bondage and tyranny and oppression from the King of England, because we had certain rights that were being violated by the government of England. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And human rights across the globe are now based on the American concept of the rights that come from our Creator. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Freedoms that come across the globe. When people say human rights, they come from this group of guys who sat down and realized there's a God Almighty who sits on the throne, who gets to make the rules. Now, Benjamin Franklin didn't agree with a lot of those rules, neither did Thomas Jefferson, but they still lived by the rules. Right? Thomas Jefferson tore parts of the Bible out he didn't like. He would have been a fine modern American. But the vast majority of guys, the signers of the Declaration, many of them were pastors. Many of them were pastors who signed the Declaration of the Independence. Because they came saying it is God Almighty. And even if there were guys who were deists or even an atheist, they were still living in the culture of Christianity that understood without these laws and without God speaking, there's no such thing as human rights, because every man will do that which is right in his own eyes, and you'll end up with something horrific. And the cultures and societies that kick out God, like the Weimar Republic in the Germany in the 1920s, ends up with a Nazi Germany because they could no longer measure right and wrong because they kicked out God. They took over the churches and said the church is subject to the state. And a handful of guys tried to say, no, it's not. No, it's not. And they got together in this little town in Germany called Barmen, and a bunch of pastors in the little town of Barmen signed a document that you could actually look up online. It's called the Barmen Declaration. It's a group of guys who stood up against the Nazis and said, no, the government is not in charge, God is in charge, and where the government does things that are wrong and violates God's laws, it's God who has the say. A lot of those guys would end up getting hung. They'd end up in concentration camps. I believe Dietrich Bonhoeffer was one of the guys who signed that. You can go home and read it. There are always people who stood up saying, we have seen this in history. It is the story of the end of the book of Judges. When a society leaves God, there's nothing but doom and destruction. And I would submit to you, the same is true in our individual lives. When we individually wander away and walk away from the laws of God and start to say, well, I will do what I feel is right, without any other compass than your own feelings, you will end up far from God and not know it. And by default, you will end up sanctioning and agreeing with and blessing things that God would say, I hate. And I would submit to you, your life, certainly your eternal life, will be much happier if you submit to the laws of God on God's terms, God's way. If you don't forget that He sits on the throne, and you come to Him in worship, and you come to Him in praise, and you come to Him in honor, and you say, I don't really know everything, but I'll learn what you've had to say, God. And I'll adjust my life to your rules, because if left to my own rules, I'm going to screw this thing up. And I'm not big enough to handle all of society. It's too big for me, God. I'm not an elected official. I don't sit in mighty positions of power. I'm not going to influence the whole culture. I'm not a celebrity. I'm not an influencer. I'm not a politician. I'm not a multimillionaire. I'm just me. God would say, that's all I need. If you just be you, but follow God's laws, God's way, worshiping Him in truth and honor, He will say this, He will guarantee this, I will take care of you. I will absolutely take care of you. Through thick and thin, hell and high water, good times and bad, I will take care of you, and I will never let you go. I will never let you go. And when the whole society is running one way, and the whole society is saying, this is our new virtue, these are our new morals, this is our new ethics, but you say instead, I don't care what this culture is telling me, what the ethics and the morals and the virtues are. I'm going to let God tell me what they are. And even if I stand all by myself, I will stand by myself with God. That's what I need. Because if I'm by myself with God, I'm actually on the winning side. I'm on the winning side. I feel like, is there more to say? God's like, no, they got it. Stand with me. Let's close in prayer. Oh. Lord, I just feel right now a heartbreak to, and I wasn't planning this at all, and you know it, Jesus. I feel like we should pray for America. We are a nation ripping and tearing with anger and rage and violence, offense. We now sanction things that years ago we would have been shocked that such an act was done. We now are losing our compassion. We're losing our tenderness. We're losing our love for one another. We're losing our ability to even talk to each other to get back to where you want us to be at all. And Lord, I just pray that a healing power would come through our nation. That you would rain it down through the halls of government in Washington, D.C. You would have it happen in the halls of Olympia at our state capitol. You would bring it to our city hall. You would filter it out into our society. You would bring it down into our very hearts too, Lord. That you would forgive us for rage and anger and malice and judgmentalism. You cast that out of us. You forgive us for the carrying those horrific sins, letting our passions and our feelings and our raging anger get the most of us. Where we suddenly start sanctioning things, we should be saying, whoa, wait a minute. And Lord, I just pray that you would bring a cleansing, healing power through everyone who is standing in this room or hearing online by my voice, you would bring a healing, cleansing power into their mind and into their heart. You would shape them and mold them the way you want them to be. They would hear your voice and begin to tune out all the other voices screaming and yelling and clamoring in society, and they would hear you and only you, and you would say, this is the way, my child, walk in it. And then you would give us the strength and the courage that even if we're standing alone, all by ourselves, we still stand because we know we're standing on ground with you. That we, in our hearts, do not forget where Shiloh is. We do not forget where the throne is. We do not forget where the worship is. We do not forget where the power is. We do not forget where your word pours forth. It comes from your very throne of heaven. And so, Lord, would you heal us? Heal us all as Americans. Heal us as citizens. Heal us as people in Spokane, as people in Washington State. Heal us as Americans. This I pray in your most powerful, mighty name, as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ, who sits on the throne. Amen. All right. Whew, that's enough for today.
And then just as a reminder, if anyone's able to help move some of the trash from downstairs, that would be the bee's knees. If you're able to meet with Tanya afterwards, that would be awesome. Thank you a ton, fam.